The stranger arrived on a dark and stormy night. He cut a mysterious figure wrapped in bandages from head to toe. He sought refuge at the local inn, the Coach and Horses. The innkeeper, Mrs. Hall, welcomed him warmly. She showed him to a cozy room and stoked the fire. The stranger, however, remained aloof and withdrawn. He demanded to be left alone. His gruff manner and strange appearance set tongues wagging in the small town of Iping. The stranger kept to himself, rarely leaving his room. He spent his days shut away, conducting strange experiments. Whispers of his odd behavior spread through the town like wildfire. Some whispered of alchemy and dark magic. Others speculated about a terrible accident. Curiosity burned within the townsfolk. They yearned to uncover the truth behind the stranger's bandages. Days turned into weeks, and the stranger's funds began to dwindle. He became increasingly agitated and short-tempered. Mrs. Hall, ever the gracious host, offered him credit. He refused, his voice a low growl from beneath the bandages. One night, the stranger vanished from the inn, leaving behind unpaid bills and a growing sense of unease. The townsfolk whispered of curses and hauntings, their imaginations running wild. The next morning, the town awoke to a string of petty thefts. Shops had been ransacked, their cash boxes emptied. Footprints led to and from the Coach and Horses. Fear now mixed with the townsfolk's curiosity. They began to suspect the stranger was responsible for the thefts. Mrs. Hall, however, remained skeptical. She chose to believe in the best of people, even those shrouded in mystery. The thefts continued, becoming bolder and more brazen. The townsfolk, their patience wearing thin, demanded answers. Mrs. Hall, facing mounting pressure, decided to confront her enigmatic guest. She knocked timidly on his door, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no response. She tried the handle, but the door was locked from the inside. Fear gnawed at Mrs. Hall's resolve. She knew something was terribly wrong. She gathered a group of brave townsfolk and, armed with a poker and a few lanterns, they cautiously entered the stranger's room. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor. The air hung heavy with the scent of strange chemicals. But the stranger was nowhere to be found. As the townsfolk searched the room, they stumbled upon a horrifying sight. A pile of bandages lay discarded on the floor, stained with blood. Beside them, a notebook filled with bizarre diagrams and cryptic notes. The townsfolk gasped in horror, their worst fears confirmed. The stranger was not merely eccentric, he was dangerous. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. A cold wind swept through the inn, extinguishing the lanterns and sending shivers down their spines. Panicked shouts filled the air as the townsfolk stumbled about blindly. They could hear heavy breathing, feel a presence moving among them, but they could see nothing. Terror gripped the town of Iping. The invisible stranger, now unmasked, wreaked havoc with impunity. He stalked the streets, unseen and unheard, his motives shrouded in mystery. The townsfolk, once curious, now lived in fear, their lives turned upside down by the stranger in their midst. Mrs. Hall, her initial skepticism replaced by dread, closed the Coach and Horses. She boarded up the windows and barricaded the doors, seeking refuge from the unseen terror that haunted her inn. The townsfolk, equally terrified, retreated into their homes, their laughter and chatter replaced by an eerie silence. The constable, a portly man named Bobby Jaffers, found himself woefully outmatched. He patrolled the streets, his eyes darting nervously from side to side, his hand hovering over his truncheon, but the invisible man was always one step ahead, his footsteps silent, his presence undetectable. One night, the invisible man's reign of terror reached its peak. He broke into the town hall, smashing windows and overturning furniture. He ransacked the church, scattering hymnals and toppling the pulpit. The townsfolk, their patience exhausted, their fear reaching its limit, decided to fight back. Armed with pitchforks, shovels, and anything else they could find, the townsfolk of Iping took to the streets. They spread out, forming a human net, determined to corner the invisible man. The night air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the pounding of their hearts. Suddenly a scream pierced the night. A group of men had cornered the Invisible Man in the town square. They could hear his enraged shouts, feel the rush of air as he lashed out blindly. The men swung their weapons wildly, desperate to strike their unseen assailant. Chaos reigned as the Invisible Man, fueled by rage and fear, fought back with terrifying strength. He tossed men aside like ragdolls, their bodies crashing to the ground with sickening thuds. The townsfolk, their courage faltering, began to scatter, their dreams of capturing the Invisible Man dissolving into fear. In the ensuing chaos, the Invisible Man made his escape. He vanished into the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a town paralyzed by terror. The townsfolk, defeated and demoralized, retreated to their homes. The memory of the Invisible Man's rampage seared into their minds. The Invisible Man was never seen again in the town of Iping, but his presence lingered, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of the ordinary. The townsfolk, forever changed by their encounter with the Invisible, would never forget the terror they had faced, and they would never again underestimate the power of the unseen.